Welcome to all of you. It's really my great pleasure to welcome you here for one more of our never-ending talks of the 50th anniversary of CORE and where we invite all our kind of Nobel laureate friends to come and give us some talks and some ideas. So it's really very nice for us to see you all here. I will not introduce the speaker myself since Pierre Dehaye knows him very much better than I do, so I'll let him the honor and the pleasure to do that. But welcome and thank you very much, Bob, for coming once more to CORE. Of course, you know the way, but it's still nice that you keep coming back. And so thank you very much. And please, Pierre, you can give the introduction.
Thank you, Philippe. As you said, it's an honor and a pleasure, a privilege to introduce Robert Aumann. You know, it's a distinguished game theorist, a mathematician first, PhD from MIT in 1955, then professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and may I say inspirator, contributor, of course, to the Center for the Study of Rationality. A mathematician who, deeply influenced by the seminal 1944 book of von Neumann and Morgenstern, decided to invest in social science, in particular economics, but not only. And a large number of contributions, let me just quote a few. Of course, Bob, your work on repeated games, which earned you the 2005 Nobel Prize in Economics together with Thomas Schelling, for having enhanced our understanding of a conflict and cooperation through game theory analysis, the words of the Nobel Committee. In the background, The Prisoner's Dilemma, well known, that describe, in a nutshell, a wide range of economic, social, and political situations, including arms race, an individually preferred strategy that, if followed by all, leads to a disaster, while there is a collectively preferable alternative. How to resolve such a dilemma? What makes people actually cooperate? These are the questions that you have addressed. I retain also another key work that bears on the role of information with the concept of common knowledge, correlated equilibrium, and what I consider as a really beautiful paper, Agreeing to Disagree. Worth mentioning, of course, is Markets with a Continuum of Traders, an influential paper, and your 1974 book with Lloyd Shapley, Values of Non-Atomic Games. I could say much more, but I cannot resist the temptation to mention your very nice epistemological paper, What is Game Theory Trying to Accomplish?, that I keep recommending to everyone willing to understand what economic theory means. You have had a special and long-lasting relationship with UCLouvain and CORE ever since 1969. There was indeed an Israeli-Belgian game theory school, and to use your words, CORE as a macrocosm of game theoretic research in a paper, the title of a paper you wrote in 1987 at the occasion of CORE 20th anniversary. Shortly after, 1989, you were awarded an honorary degree by our university. As a regular visitor, you have interacted and influenced many people at CORE. Jacques Drèze, of course, Jean Gabsevich, Werner Hildenbrand, Claude Dapremont, Jean-Philippe Vial, our late friends, of course, Jean-François Mertens, and many other, not to mention the many visitors, Hervé Moulin, Shlomo Weber, Paul Champsor, Benjamin Chitowitz, David Schmeidler, Shmuel Zamir, Yair Thoman, John Roberts, Yossi Greenberg, Truman Bewley, Elon Kohlberg, Abraham Neyman, and others. So the list is very long. But I don't want to take more time. But I want to mention something you're proud of. You have 5 children, 21 grandchildren, 20 great-grandchildren, soon 21, you told me yesterday. And You have supervised 15 PhD students that all are well-known game theorists by now. That's it. So please, Bob, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So this is a very moving moment for me. Back in Louvain, yesterday we were in Louvain-la-Vieille. Now in Louvain-la-Neuve, as Pierre said, it's just about 50 years of association with CORE and with the University of Louvain. And it's for me a very moving moment to be back here and talk to you, and I have been tremendously influenced by CORE. I think at one point I said that CORE is my European home. Yes, my home in Europe. So I'm very glad to be back here. I think I recall the last time I think that I was here was in February of 2002. And the reason I remember it is that we were having dinner in the home of Jacques Drèze, the founder of CORE. And at one point I said, it is now 2002, which means 2 minutes after 8 on the 2nd of on the 20th of February in the year 2002. And so I think that event similar event will take place in less than 100 years now. But after that, we will not have a similar event for more than 1,000 years. Okay, so I'm very, very happy to be back here, and let's get started with this talk. Rule-rationality, a synthesis of behavioral and mainstream economics. The 2002, okay, again we have that, Economics Nobel Prize was awarded to Daniel Kahneman and Vernon Smith. Now you'll notice that Kahneman is in red and Smith is in blue, okay? And we're going to follow that color coding. Kahneman showed that people are irrational. Smith showed that people are rational. What's going on? So I don't want to just say this. I will let the Nobel Committee say put it in the words of the Nobel Committee. In extensive research on human behavior based on surveys and experiments, Kahneman called into question the assumption of economic rationality. Economic rationality, for those in the audience, I promise that this will be a totally non-technical lecture, so I want to explain what economic rationality means. Economic rationality is not the same thing as rationality in everyday language. In everyday language, I have to take off my hearing aids because otherwise I speak too softly. I hear myself amplified. So I have to take them off. Please remind me to take them afterwards. I will, otherwise I forget them. Yes. So economic rationality is the opposite almost of rationality in everyday language. It does not mean being scientific. It does not mean being logical. It just means pursuing your own goals. That's all it means. Pursuing your own goals, trying to do the best you can for furthering your own goals. That's what economic rationality means. I have a student, I can't avoid interrupting myself. I had a student who put it very succinctly. If a black cat crosses your path and you spit as a result of that, are you being rational or irrational? Well, obviously you're being highly irrational in the everyday sense of the word, because it's a stupid superstition to think that a black cat crossing your path means bad luck, and it's even more stupid to think that spitting avoids this bad luck. Yes? But economically, it's totally rational, because you believe, given your information, you believe that spitting, that the black cat causes bad luck, and that spitting avoids it. So you are furthering your goals given your information. So you are highly economically rational. That is what economic rationality means, furthering your own goals. So Kahneman showed that people are incapable of fully analyzing complex decision situations. They rely instead on heuristic shortcuts and rules of thumb, and that is in the Nobel website. Okay? Smith, according to the Nobel Committee, showed that the first experiments in economics tested the most fundamental result in economic theory, that the market price equilibrates between supply and demand. Smith found, much to his surprise, that the prices obtained in the laboratory were very close to their theoretical values. Other researchers, by and large, confirmed the results. So Kahneman showed that economics does not work. Smith showed that economics works. Okay? So what indeed is going on? Kahneman and Tversky themselves give the answer. Tversky probably would have shared this Nobel Prize in 2002, I can't be sure, but he died in the late 90s. He was a lifelong scientific partner of Kahneman. And in their pioneering 1974 paper, they write that people use heuristics, rules of thumb. They don't consciously maximize. So they write, in general, these heuristics are quite useful, but sometimes they lead to severe and systematic errors. You got this? In general is in blue. Yes? Sometimes is in red. Got it? So that's what they wrote in their paper in Science. That's what, basically for that paper and for the subsequent research that they did, Kahneman got the prize. In brief, Smith relates to the usual, the rule, the in general. Kahneman relates to the unusual, the exception, the sometimes. And they're both right, okay? But what was the Nobel Committee up to? How could it give the prize for diametrically opposed results? So they awarded the prize not, as usual, for findings, but for a methodology which was used by both Kahneman and Smith. Laboratory experiments, which Smith used mostly, or almost exclusively, and surveys or polls in economics. Yes, they did not, the laboratory experiments, of course, we're used to them in physics and chemistry, in biology, but not in economics. They were not the first to use laboratory experiments. There were others who came before them, but they did it. They used the laboratory experiments most. They really gave them the push that was needed to introduce laboratory experiments into economics and make it. This is what led to the current what's called behavioral economics. So now, George Hegel, a German philosopher, promulgated this idea of a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. So you have a thesis saying one thing, antithesis saying the opposite. Synthesis is what's putting them together, and that's what I am doing today. So the thesis is classical economics, which is based on rationality, self-interested behavior. The antithesis is behavioral economics. So okay, we have mainstream economics, we have behavioral economics. And the antithesis, so the mainstream economics is based on rationality. The antithesis is systematic irrationality. And this was Kahneman's idea. And the synthesis, which I'm going to suggest to you today, is what I call rule-rationality. To explain to you what rule-rationality means, first I have to explain what act-rationality means. Act-rationality is maximize over acts. In each decision situation, choose an act that's best in that situation. Okay? So you have to figure out, you have to try to optimize. Whenever you're faced with a decision situation, you have to try to do the best that you can in that situation and make calculations and optimize rationally. Rule rationality is to maximize over rules. The heuristics, the rules of thumb of Kahneman and Tversky. Maximize over rules in each kind of decision situation. Choose a rule that's best on the whole, or usually, but not necessarily always. Okay? Now there's an important difference between act and rule rationality. Act rationality is deliberate, conscious. You're faced with some kind of decision situation. You want to figure out what's best. You try to do the best that you can. You try to make an accurate calculation, and you consciously do the best you can for yourself. Rule rationality is not that way at all. It's evolutionary. It's learned. You use heuristics, rules of thumb. I will give examples very shortly. It's subconscious. That is rule rationality. And the rule is often executed by means of a mechanism, and I will give some examples of this now. So the first example is bees, flowers, and nectar. So there's a German biologist. His name was, or is, Andreas Birch, and he did this experiment with bees and artificial flowers. And the experiment that he carried out was that he had a field of artificial flowers. You see here the field of artificial flowers. Some are blue, some are orange or yellow. And these are indicated by a 5 by 5 rectangle. Each one of these flowers consists of a disc, a colored disc. In the middle of the colored disc, there is a tube, and that tube supplies nectar. What is nectar? It is sugar water. Yeah? So the bee flits around these flowers and takes nectar from the flowers. The experimenter, Mr. Birch, Dr. Birch, supplies sugar water to the flowers by means of a mechanism under the field, and he can supply nectar to any flower that he wants. So when the bees come out of their cocoon, when they are born, so to speak, he for 2 weeks, he supplies nectar to the blue flowers only, and no nectar to the yellow flowers. And the bees flit around, and they try the yellow flowers, and they try the blue flowers, and they see that the blue flowers supply nectar, so they go for the blue flowers. And they learn to ignore the yellow flowers. After 2 weeks, Birch cut the nectar from the blue flowers and supplied nectar to the yellow flowers. And he let the bees loose on the flowers. Now, what happened? The bees kept going to the blue flowers, and they had no nectar. And they did not go to the yellow flowers. And they got thinner and thinner. They were very hungry, and then they died. Okay? And they did not touch the yellow flowers. Now, if you were a bee, what would you do? Yes, I mean, I think if I was a bee, perhaps I would see that there is no nectar in the blue flowers, so I would think to myself, hey, this is an experiment which is being which is being run by Dr. Birch, and I think I better maybe just try the yellow flowers, but they didn't do that, and they died, and it sounds irrational, right? They were not being rational, these bees. Well, why would you expect rationality from a bee? Yes. I mean, if I was a bee, you could expect rationality from me, yes, because I work for the Federman Center for the Study of Rationality. But why would you expect rationality from a bee? But you should expect rationality from a bee. Evolution. Evolution is all about rationality. It's about the survival of the fittest. And organisms that act to promote their interests, yes, those are the organisms that survive, okay? Nice guys finish last, excuse me for saying it, but people also who promote their own interests, they get to enjoy whatever it is that there is to enjoy. Yeah? So organisms who in the fight for survival in the natural world, an organism has to try to promote its own interests, and the genes that survive are those genes that make you try to, so you should expect rationality from a bee. You should expect the bee to promote his own interests. So why didn't the bee go and look at yellow flowers? Puzzle. Okay? Let's take another example. This example is the Ultimatum Game. Some of you may have heard of it. It was initiated by Werner Goethe and others in 1982. It was repeated by Roth and Slonim in 91 and 98. Sorry. And this is how it works. So two people must divide $100 or 100 euros. I should have changed this. Yes. They're in separate rooms, and they do not know each other and interact only this one time. They're in separate rooms. They're not negotiating with each other face to face. A designated one, whom we'll call the offerer, makes an offer of how to divide the $100. The other one, the responder, may either accept or reject the offer. If he accepts, the amount is divided accordingly. If not, no one gets anything. Okay? That's it. That's the game. They leave by separate exits. They leave the room by separate exits. This game is played with a computer console, and they never get to know each other. They never get to see each other. They never get to interact with each other. This was tried on by Goethe, in the original game. It was tried by about on 100 couples or so, just each one only one time, okay? And in the original experiment of Goethe, it was the $100 were 10 Deutschmarks, okay? I don't know if you remember what a Deutschmark was, but anyway, it's less than $100 today. It's maybe 10 Deutschmarks are maybe $30 today, 1982 Deutschmarks. But afterwards, the experiment was repeated by Roth and Slonim in countries where, with low incomes and with equivalents maybe the $100 is I think a fair translation of this. Now, what would you expect? You would expect the responder basically to take any amount that he is offered, right? Let's say we're talking about $100, let's say he would be offered $10. $10 is money. This was done with students, poor, students. I don't know how many of you are students, but probably even 10 euros today, why turn it down, yes? You can buy a couple of beers with it, surely, yes? And why turn down? There's no reason to so the offerer would figure this out, and you would expect that the offerer makes offers of 90 to 10, 80 to 20 maybe, something like that, and that they would be accepted. That's not what happened. Usually, most offers were 65 to 35 or more generous, and they were accepted. Some offers were 80 to 20, and even, 20 euros today would be rejected. Even larger amounts would be rejected. Okay? So this is, like the bees, this is irrational. So how can you explain this? You can explain it by pride, self-respect, feelings of being insulted, feelings of wanting to take revenge, that kind of thing. But it's irrational, yes? An irrelevant explanation would be reputational effects. In other words, if a person, you would say that the responder does not want to accept $20 because he'll get a reputation for being what we call in the United States a sucker, yes, a person who, is willing to be kicked in the stomach, yes. And he'll get a reputation for that. He'll be a reputation for being a soft touch, and people will always offer him less money. But reputational effects are not relevant over here, because nobody knows who you are. Even the other person, the offerer does not know who the responder is. There's no reputation to be gained. Reputation is irrelevant. Okay. So now how do we explain this by rule rationality? Okay, so these bees and the responders were act irrational. They were behaving irrationally. They were not promoting their own interests. So this is how it would appear to Kahneman and Tversky, and how it appears to us also. What's happening? So the bees are irrational because the act rational thing to do would be to look for food anywhere. The rule is go by experience. The mechanism for the rule is learning. When you go by experience, you are what you have learned in those 2 weeks since you were born is that only blue flowers have nectar. If you were dying of thirst in the desert, you're looking for water, all right? You're looking for water. You're dying for thirst. Would you try to bite into a stone to get water? No, even if you were dying from thirst, you would not look for water in a stone, right? Because you have learned that stones do not have water. Now these bees have learned that yellow flowers do not have nectar. So even though they were dying from hunger, they did not go to the yellow flowers because what they learned was to go by that the blue flowers have nectar and the yellow flowers do not. So the rule is to go by experience, and it's a good rule. It's a good rule to go by experience. It's a good rule to do what you have learned to do. Sometimes it doesn't work, like in Birch's laboratory, but that's not out in nature, okay? In nature, nature does not switch the nectar from blue flowers to yellow flowers, yes? It doesn't happen. So the evolution, the mechanism of evolution does not work on Birch's laboratory. So you don't expect rationality in that kind of environment. What is going on in the ultimatum game? The act, when you're offered $20, act rationality would be dictate to take the $20. The rule is Don't let people kick you in the stomach. The mechanism for the rule is pride, self-respect, insult, revenge. It's true that these things are not relevant in that situation, but they have developed as a heuristic, as a rule, as a mechanism for behavior in the world. You do not consciously optimize. You have developed this pride, you have developed this self-respect, you have developed the instinct for revenge, and they stand you in good stead. Usually when people negotiate, they don't negotiate in separate rooms with computer consoles in front of them. They negotiate face-to-face. When you negotiate face-to-face, it's not a good idea to accept an offer of $20 because usually you do have the reputational effect. Rationality is an expression of evolutionary forces, and evolutionary forces work by the rule. They don't work by the exception, okay? They work by what happens usually, not the contrived situation, okay? Let me give some other examples. Eating, okay, that is the best example of rule rationality, okay? Why do people eat? The reason for eating is to have energy to live by, to get the materials necessary for living. Children eat in order to grow. We eat in order to get energy and to get vitamins and to get everything that our body needs, yes? That is the reason, the underlying reason that we eat. But what makes us eat? When we go to lunch now in a few minutes, are we going to eat because we feel we need energy? I don't know about you, but I'm not going to eat for that reason. I'm going to eat because I didn't have a very big breakfast and I'm hungry, okay? And I hope the food will be good so that I'll enjoy the food. So there is hunger and there's the enjoyment of food. And that is the mechanism that makes us eat. Now, the rule is eat when you're hungry. And it's a good rule, okay? Maybe I could do get along just as well by skipping lunch, but it's in general, it's a good rule, okay? Eat when you're hungry. Eat when you see good food in front of you. It's a good rule. But sometimes it's not very good at all. An obese person craving another piece of chocolate, yes, and he or she is obese, they should not follow that rule of eat when you're hungry. It's a bad idea, yes, they are going to cut their lives short by that, all right? And another example of usually the rule, eat when you're hungry, works well, but sometimes it does not work well, is on the opposite. When people came out of the concentration camps at the end of the Second World War, and they were very, very hungry, and suddenly they were offered a lot of food. They ate the food because they were very, very hungry, but their stomachs had shrunk, and they ate a lot of food, they died. The stomachs exploded, and they died. Many people died that way, coming right out of the concentration camps. So it could be that eating is, when you're hungry, is not a good idea. So usually it's a good idea. Sometimes it's not such a good idea, okay? Usually it promotes your interests. Sometimes it does not. That is rule rationality. Now, you didn't choose to be, that mechanism of hunger was not chosen by you. The mechanism of hunger was, nature evolved the mechanism of hunger in order to promote your interests, usually. Okay, so that's another example of rule rationality. Eat when you're hungry. Good as a rule, not good always. Okay, Kahneman and Tversky, not good always. When you're obese, don't do that. Smith, usually do it when you're a normal person faced with eating lunch. Okay, enjoyment of sex. Sex is another example. Why did sex evolve in the natural world? It's in order to get children, right? In order to get offspring. That is why nature evolved the mechanism of sex. But is that why people have sex? Some of the time, yes, but most of the time, that's not why people have sex. People have sex because it's enjoyable, yes? They have the sex drive. That is what makes them have sex. And usually, it's a good idea. Usually you get children. You can get children from it. Most people try to avoid having children from sex, but nature evolved it in order that you have. But sometimes it's a bad idea, like in sexually transmitted diseases. It's not a good idea to have sex. Usually it's a good idea. The mechanism that nature evolved in order to get you to have sex, and the basic reason is for propagation of the species, sex is a good idea, but sometimes it can lead to problems. The mechanism is the enjoyment. Let's take another example. Bees and orchids. This is really a sub case of the sex thing. Let me show you a picture here. Bees and orchids. Okay. Now, on the left, you see over here an orchid that looks like a bee. And you can see that it looks like a bee. You look on the right, you see this orchid with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blooms. Yes, they're about the size of large bees. And the bees come to this orchid to have sex, yes. They think that the blooms, well, I don't know what they think, you know, I've never been a bee, but apparently they are attracted for sexual reasons to the orchid, and they go and they copulate on the orchid. And in fact, the orchid does not supply them with any nectar. What's it called? The pollen sticks to the head of the bee. The bee does not get to eat it at all. It flits around, it pollinates another orchid, but it is really being cheated. It's not being cheated because apparently it thinks it's having sex on the orchid. But that is this is an example where where for the bee, well, maybe it's worthwhile for the bee also because it's getting the equivalent of the enjoyment of sex, yes? but it's not carrying out the purpose for which the bee really goes to pollinate, and that is the propagation is not being carried out through this pollination. Well, actually, it is being carried out through the. So maybe there is some connection over here between the bees and the. Now we get to probability matching. Okay, let me tell you about this. Is one of the earliest experiments in economics. They had this machine that emits either a red light or a green light. And it emits a red light 3/4 of the time at random, and a green light 1/4 of the time. Okay, and the subjects that are being tested are told that this machine emits a green light 3/4 of the time red and 1/4 of the time green. And you have to try to match the color. And if you match the color, you get, let's say, €1, okay? And if you don't match the color, you get nothing. All right? So you have to try to predict what light the machine will emit. Now, most of the subjects predicted 3/4 of the time red and 1/4 of the time green. All right? Now, that is not optimal. You should predict red all the time. When you predict red all the time, then you get 75% of the time you get it right, because the machine emits 75% red. So you get 75 cents on the euro for each thing. You do it 100 times, you get 75 euros. When you do it 3/4 of the time red and 1/4 of the time green, then you get 3/4 times 3/4, you get 9/16 of the time you match on red. 1/16 of the time, 1/4 times 1/4, you match on the green. You get 9/16. I'm sorry, I promised no math, but okay. Maybe I should stop at this point, yes. You get anyway, believe me, okay, you don't have to check this. You don't have to check this. It's 9/16 plus 1/16, which is 5/8. So you get 60 for 100 runs. You get 62.5 euros on this experiment, which is less than 75 euros. But nevertheless, that's what people did. They probability matched. Now, what is the explanation for that? Why did they do that? Well, before giving you the answer to that, I'm going to quote Jacques Drèze, who pointed out, maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I don't know, something like that, in one of my stays at my European home. People go to work in the morning. They can choose, maybe they can choose several ways to go to work. Let's say they go to work by automobile. 3/4 of the time, Route A is preferable. 1/4 of the time, Route B is preferable. Sometimes there are traffic jams, accidents on Route A. Sometimes there are traffic jams, but usually 3/4 of the time, Route A is preferable. What do people do? Do they probability match? No. They choose root A every day. Every day they choose root A. So why do they probability match in this experiment? Because this experiment is unusual. They're not faced with colored flashing lights every day. They don't know how to handle that. What they want to do is please the experimenter. When the experimenter says 3/4 of the time it's red, 1/4 of the time it's green, they say, hey, what's the right answer to this puzzle, okay? And the right answer is, they figure that the right thing to do is to try to get the right answer. That's the good thing to do in most puzzle situations, and that's what they try to do. But when they are faced with the actuality, they don't probability match. Okay, that is what Jacques pointed out at that time. Let me get to the matter of rational emotions. There is a book called Rational Emotions, written by my scientific grandson, Eyal Winter, okay? Eyal Winter did a doctorate with Shmuel Zamir, who visited CORE often, and Shmuel Zamir did a doctorate with me. So Eyal is a scientific grandson, and he has written a very popular book which has just been translated into French by Pierre Dehaze. It's I don't know what the exact title in French is, but it is now the original title in Hebrew. The translation of the original Hebrew title is Rational Emotions. Winter shows, what's the title in French, Pierre?
Libérez vos émotions.
Okay. What Winter shows is that many of the emotions which we think of as irrational are actually rational as rules. We mentioned a few of them before. We mentioned insult, revenge, honor, all those things that looked irrational and were irrational in the context of the Ultimatum Game, but actually as a rule they are rational. They get you to refuse offers which will give you a bad reputation. So they are rational emotions. Another rational emotion is anger, okay? Anger. I remember once I was in Switzerland. It's a few years ago. Pierre mentioned that I have 5 children. So I had the 5 children with me, and they were small. I think the oldest was maybe 11 or 12. They were ranging from 3 upwards. It was a Friday afternoon. I had to get from Zurich to London that afternoon, a Friday afternoon. I had to get there because Shabbat was coming in on Friday evening, and not allowed to travel on Shabbat. And so we asked, when does one have to check in? We were told, check in an hour before. This was before the time of security at airports, yes. We checked in, or maybe an hour and a half before I checked in. Somehow with 7 people, it takes, for a group of 7 people to check in, takes longer than 7 times a single person, much longer, yes? We got to the gate, and they said the flight is closed. We can't let you on the plane. So I responded with a blast of fury and some invectives that are not mentionable over here, yes. And I said, I'll mention only some of the milder ones. Yeah, but the hell it's closed, yes, and so on. And I raised my voice, and he said, "Don't raise your voice." And I said, "The hell I won't raise my voice!" And I shouted at him, and it was not put on. Yes, I said we came on time to the desk. We came on time. We're going to get on that plane, and I raised my voice, and I was really, really angry. And we got on the plane. Yes. We got on the plane, yes. And that anger was not put on, yes. It was not something which was purposely done. Anger is an emotion which can be useful. And insult can be useful. Revenge can be useful. Honor can be useful. These things, rational emotions, are an example of rule rationality. Okay? Let me tell you this story of Arrow, Kenneth Arrow. You all know the name Kenneth Arrow. He died a few months ago. I think arguably the greatest economist of the let's say the second half of the 20th century, certainly, yes, over the last 60, 70 years. So he told me this story. He said there was a group of airmen based in Saipan in the Pacific Ocean, 2,000 miles away from Tokyo in the Second World War. And they had to fly a bombing mission from Saipan to Tokyo and back, okay? The mission consisted of 25 sorties, okay? 25 times they flew to Tokyo and back to Saipan. Now, 2,000 miles is about 3,000 kilometers. It's a long distance, especially for those planes of the 1940s. And they had to use a lot of gas, a lot of gas, just fuel. And it didn't allow much space for bombs. Now, a man came out from Washington. I understand CORE is the Center for Operations Research and Econometrics. So an operations research officer came out from Washington, and he looked at this situation. And he said, look, the chances that each one of you will survive this, mission is 25%. You have a three-quarters of a chance of, on one of the 25 sorties, you will be shot down. Okay? So you will die with a probability of 3/4, and 1/4 you will survive. I have a suggestion for you. My suggestion is we will do a how does one say, a lottery. We will choose half of you, and half of you will fly a one-way mission. So you can take a lot more bombs. Yes, because you need to take for one way, it's half the distance. Yes, it's 3,000 kilometers instead of 6,000 kilometers. And you can take much more bombs, much more, and it's true that you will, at the end it's one way, so you'll be dead at the end, but you will, you have your probability of staying alive altogether for the 25 missions is half instead of a quarter. And he offered this to the 25 airmen. And he interviewed each one separately and said, will you accept this? And all 25 of them said, no way, yes. And they were asked, why? Why don't you accept this? We're increasing your probability of living by you have twice the probability of living. You'll have half a probability rather than a quarter. And they said that statistic is generated by the other airmen. I'm a much better pilot than all the others, and I will survive. All of them said that, yes? I will survive. Okay, irrational, right? Okay, that's but so what were they doing? What they were doing was going by the rule. The rule in the armed services is stay alive another day. Stay alive tomorrow. The day after tomorrow will take care of itself. Yeah? But just stay alive another day. That is the rule when you are in the army. By the way, I also was in the army a short time. I came to Israel too old to join the regular army, but I was in the reserves. And the rule was, a much less serious matter, is when you're offered leave this week or next week, take it this week, yes? Next week, even if you have a family celebration next week, take it this week. Even if there's a religious holiday next week, take it this week. Next week, your service may be called off. Next week, all leaves may be called off. Yeah, you don't know what happens next week. So the airmen did the rule-rational thing, which is stay alive another day, and perhaps not act rational. But the story is that, in fact, they were right. Because after 3 missions, the United States captured Iwo Jima, which is much, much closer to Tokyo, and the whole mission was called off from Saipan. Iwo Jima is like 750 miles from Tokyo or something like that, or maybe even closer. And the whole mission was called off, and they were right to stay alive. So they were right, yes. That's irrelevant, by the way. It could be that they were wrong, yes, but they went by the rule. The rule is stay alive another day, and that is what they went by. I think I will skip the other things. Maybe just talk about relevance for a moment. Relevance. Okay, this is one of the examples of Kahneman and Tversky. So Linda is young, single, outspoken, and very bright. This is a survey they did, okay? They tell this story to subjects. As a student, she was deeply concerned with discrimination and social justice. Is it more likely that Linda is a bank teller or that she is a bank teller and an active feminist? What do you think? What do people think over here? Any answers? Any suggestions for answers? Yes? No? Batya? No? Okay. So people were asked this, and most respondents said that it's more likely that she is a bank teller and a feminist. Okay? Now, this is obviously stupid, yes? Or maybe not obviously, but it's stupid because being a bank teller includes the possibility of being a bank teller and a feminist, yes? But people, you see, do not pay attention to this. They pay attention to what is relevant. They assume that what they're being told, this whole long story, single, outspoken, very bright, deeply concerned with discrimination, they hear the word feminist. That's it. That's the right answer. Okay, you know, they don't make they don't make a long calculation, okay? And they're not maybe used to the inclusion principle. So they say, so the relevance is a rule. Go by what you assume that what you're being told is relevant, yes? That is, and it's a good assumption in general. When there's a trick, like over here, a contrived situation, it doesn't work. But usually, going by what is relevant is correct. Here's another example of that. It's a nursery rhyme. As I was going to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. Every wife had 7 sacks. Every sack had 7 cats. Every cat had 7 kids. Kids, cats, sacks, and wives. How many were going to St. Ives? Who knows the answer? Well, maybe 2802, which is 1 plus 1, I, and the man with 7 wives, and the 7 wives, and the 7 times 7 sacks, and the 7 times 7 times 7 cats, and the 7 times 7 times 7 times 7 kids. Altogether, that is, again, there's a little mathematics here, but altogether it sums to 2802. And is that the right answer? No. The right answer is 1. I was going to St. Ives. I met the man with 7 wives coming from St. Ives. How many were going to St. Ives? 1. Okay? It's another example of relevance. You're tricked into believing the whole long story. You are tricked into thinking that it's relevant. But usually what you are told about a situation is relevant. I've been speaking for exactly 1 hour, and I'm going to quit over here. The summary: in making decisions, people often do not consciously optimize. Rather, they use heuristics or rules of thumb, also known as cognitive biases. These are often optimal as rules, in the sense that there's no rule that in most situations yields a better result. But in unusual situations, there may well be a better act, a decision that is better in that situation. So both Kahneman and Tversky, or both Kahneman and Smith were right, yes? Kahneman people sometimes act irrationally. The rule that they use is irrational, but usually the rule, as Smith said, is the rational one, and that provides a synthesis of mainstream economics and behavioral economics. Merci. Thank you.
Time for questions?
That's it. Questions?
Who wants the mic? Good.
UCLouvain? Okay. So, Bob, thank you very much for this talk. My question would be, how do you do game theory with this rule approach? Do you still optimize? Do you have strategies? Or is it another type of approach that you have to use?
So let me see. So the question is, what this has to do with game theory, yes?
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Okay, so I think that we had one example in the talk was about a game, right? The Ultimatum Game. Okay, so now the offerer in the Ultimatum Game, you know, he would say, well, what is the proper solution to this game? The proper solution to the game is that presumably the responder will accept any amount, any reasonable amount, let's say 10 out of $100, okay? And then, so if he accepts the 10 out of $100, then I will be better off offering that to him, because that way I get $90. But that's not the right answer, yes? He will be stupid to do that, because he should take into account, even if he is totally rational and is figuring out the best reply, he will be stupid to offer $10 and take 90 for himself, because he should know that the responder is going to be rule rational and not act rational, okay? So he should know that the responder will not accept a too small a sum, and so he would be better advised to offer 30, 35, 40, which is in fact what was being done, okay? So when you're doing games, when you're playing games, you have to take into account that the other players, even if you yourself are act rational, not only rule rational, you have to take into account that the other players may be acting according to rules and not according to what is act rational.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you, Bob, for this interesting and entertaining lecture. In your title, you suggest that rule rationality corresponds to what so-called behavioral economists are bringing out. Now, I think that in our daily life, many decisions are better taken by rule than by analysis of every situation on its own. So it would be irrational not to use rules.
Absolutely.
And then why do you formulate your title the way you did?
The answer is that using rules usually is act rational. Behavioral economics does not respond, you say you started your question by saying that behavioral economics corresponds to rule rationality. No, behavioral economics corresponds to the exception in rule rationality. Behavioral economics corresponds to the obese person craving another piece of chocolate. It doesn't correspond to you who ride a bicycle to work, okay? Yes, for you it's fine to eat a hearty lunch now, okay? It corresponds to the unusual case of the rule. Okay, that's what behavioral economics says, that people behave irrationally. But no, they don't behave irrationally. Usually the rule is, in fact, to the person's benefit. It corresponds to the unusual case, to the exceptional case, to the contrived case, to the Linda case of the feminist bank teller, yes? it corresponds to the unusual case in rule rationality. Rule rationality does both Kahneman and Smith. Kahneman is the unusual side of rule rationality. Smith is the usual side of rule rationality. Yes? That's the point. Okay, thank you very much for that question, because it really drives the point home.
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. You suggested that the rule rationality evolves from evolutionary reasons. So, during most part of mankind and evolution, it made sense to behave in a certain way as a response to the decision environment. But, we live today in an environment where we make decisions in a very different environment than the environment that was relevant in most of human evolution, right? So to give an example that you used about eating and craving food, right? So humans usually like sweet stuff, which does not create problems when we, are hunter-gatherers. But in today's society, when people can put sugar in food everywhere, the decision environment, first of all, is more complicated and can be influenced in many ways that it could not have been influenced. So the point I want to make is, and I want to ask you, is whether you think that what you call the unusual is actually becoming more and more relevant in the complex world we will live in, whether the exceptions are becoming more and more the rule.
No, I don't think so. No. So I don't think even in a complex world, I don't think the exceptions. I think almost all the examples I went through. I mean, I didn't have time over here in this lecture, but I went through. Basically, there are about 50 or 100 cognitive biases, yes, listed on the internet. Wikipedia has a list of all the cognitive biases. I think 50 is too much, but 30 or 40 cognitive biases. They all relate to unusual situations. Essentially all. I mean, I could go on giving this. I had a few other examples: relevance, hyperbolic discounting, immediacy, certainty, all those things. We're all the situations in which people respond irrationally are exceptional and usually contrived, okay? Like the St. Ives example, the Linda example, it's contrived. This is not what happens in every day. By the way, Kahneman himself wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, okay? Now, what he says is, when you think slow, then you get the optimal situation. You do it right. It's only when you're thinking fast that you do it wrong. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion is think slow, yeah? But this is crazy. A person he himself asked us the Linda question, the bank teller, okay? He asked the Linda question. Now, imagine he's coming over to me. I'm one of 100 respondents or something like that. I get $5 for responding or whatever it is. And he comes over to me and he says, he gives this long rigmarole about who Linda is, and then he says, is she a bank? Is it more likely that she's a bank teller or a bank teller and a feminist, yes? So I say, Mr. Kahneman, let me think this over. Yeah? I read your book about thinking slow. I'll give you an answer tomorrow, okay? Yeah? Now he'll say, Bob, I'm sorry, we don't have time for this, yes? You want your $5? Give me an answer now, yeah? So you don't always have a situation. And in fact, I think in most of the important decisions, the people do think slow. Yeah? We don't need Kahneman to tell us to think slow, yes? People do not respond on the spot. At least I don't. Yeah? I say when my children ask me a question, you want to go out on this vacation or on that, I say, give me a chance to think it over. Yes. People think slow naturally, except in questions which are of no importance, you know, like Linda. All right. Then they think fast, and they may give the wrong answer.
One last question.
Yeah, thanks very much for the talk. But to come, to go further with your remarks. So, how do you decide to think fast and slow? I mean, I was thinking about that during the talk, and probably it's by rule rationality, because you're not going to think slow to decide whether to think slow or fast, because this would be self-defeating. So, so in the end, that would mean that the rule rationality is what is the main driver of your decision, right? I was asking, how do you decide, when you are asked a question, a new question, how do you decide whether to think fast or slow? I mean, that should be by rule rationality.
I think on questions that are important, and you know, sometimes you've got to think fast even on important decisions, yeah? Even, we were talking yesterday about, I was talking with Pierre. You see a terrorist in front of you. He's lying on the ground. Maybe he's disabled, maybe he's not disabled, okay? You have to think within seconds whether to shoot or not to shoot, yes? Not only within split seconds, yes? Because maybe a bomb will go off right now, yes? There are some decisions that you have to make, important decisions. You're right. Sometimes you have to make important decisions fast, yes? And then you will use the rule rationality, yes? Because you don't have time to think it over. Now, on the Linda situation, it's not an important decision, yes? But also, obviously, you're not going to say to, let me, Mr. Kahneman, I want to think this over. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. That's ridiculous, yes, on a survey like that. But so sometimes the rule rationality is called for. But in important, at least in important decisions, I don't take them, I think slowly. By the way, I want to tell you a secret. I think slowly anyway. Okay. Thank you. Okay, my pleasure.